take on from there? Yesterday on the stage I talked about two strands that have sort of led to this conference. And the first of those is the dynamics of the Ambedkarite movement that is moving increasingly to Buddhism. And this movement really started among Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's direct followers in Maharashtra and in a few major towns, Delhi, Ahmedabad, Kanpur, Lucknow, Chennai, Hyderabad, and so on. And it started particularly among the so-called scheduled caste community. Now it's gone to people from scheduled caste all over India, people from the scheduled tribe community, people from the so-called OBC community, and its influence is but there's nothing like it in modern India. And I've seen in the 40 years I've been here an absolutely phenomenal change in this, in two things. An enormous speed, this speed of the influence of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's movement is just increasing more and more all the time. And secondly, the change in attitudes it's having. When I came here in 1977, in Nagpur, Buddhist rickshaw drivers, Buddhist academics were proud to say they were Buddhists, proud to say they were followers of Babasaheb. But that was rare. You didn't find that elsewhere. Yeah? You didn't find it very often somewhere, but now, all over India, people are proud to say that they're followers of Dr. Ambedkar, proud to say that they're Buddhists, that they're not, it's part of the identity, part of their dignity. And with this has gone an enormous determination, a confidence and a vitality. Yesterday, Professor Thorat talked about this, and he talked about the dangers of a counter-revolution. Babasaheb talked about the Buddha as bringing about a revolution, and he talked about the backlash, the Brahminical backlash, as a counter-revolution. So now what we're seeing is a new revolution in India taking place, and Professor Thorat, I think, warned us about a counter-revolution. What he says I take very seriously. But I personally think, and I think he would agree with me, that the revolution brought about by Babasaheb is unstoppable. And however much there's a backlash, however much there's a counter-revolution, it's only going to give fuel to the revolution itself. And you can see that. There are atrocities taking place all over in India. I think you mentioned in one of your books there's a 40% rise in the last few years in atrocities on scheduled castes. But 2.5 years ago there was a terrible flogging at Una in Gujarat. 4 or 5 people who were so-called or considered untouchable were beaten publicly for doing their traditional work of leather work. What happened? There were demonstrations all over Maharashtra, all over Gujarat, all over India. But what did you see there? You didn't see the sword. You saw the Buddhist flag. You saw the Ashoka Chakra. Yeah? So people who are affected by the violence of caste Hindus, by this backlash, they're not turning to violence. They're turning to the peaceful revolution, the peaceful Buddhist revolution of Babasaheb. And I think this is the greatest miracle of Babasaheb. That I don't know that you see anything like this in the history of the world. So I believe nothing can hold this back. Every political party in India now has to have Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar on their stage. They have to try and co-opt this tremendous energy that is there. So we've seen this change since 1956. In the next 50 years, I believe the change is going to be even more phenomenal. Yesterday I said I thought that there could be 300 million Buddhists in India over the next 50 years. Whatever the case, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's work and his conversion to Buddhism is going to have a very strong impact on Indian society and politics. So this is the first, as it were, strand for this conference. Yeah? The incredible increasing vitality and strength of the Ambedkarite Buddhist movement here, which is going to, I believe, eventually dominate Indian society and social and political life. And the second strand is to do with what is called the Asian century. Yeah? This century is being called the Asian century because the center of power, the center of influence is moving from America, from Europe to Asia. And the two biggest powers in Asia are China and India. They are going to lead the world. It could be said they're leading the world, especially China. No one can play around with China these days, and in the last 30, 40 years, the same is becoming true of India. Both these countries have one link, very special cultural link, and that is Buddhism. So as Buddhists, there's a question we all have to ask. Can Buddhism have a positive impact on the peace and cooperation between these two great nations? So this is a question very much in my mind, and this is a question that was sort of brought to the fore by my meetings with Master Chonghua in Dali. And in fact, this conference was really inspired by discussions with him. He comes from Yunnan province, which is in the western part of China, and he's been trying to develop, let me say a bit more about Yunnan first. Yunnan is an exceptional part of China in that it has the three major Buddhist traditions alive there, the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. It's also a center, a very important center for the Southern Silk Road. So, I don't know if you know anything about the Silk Road, but the Silk Road was not only a road that carried merchants, carried goods, but it carried culture, it carried Buddhism. It was a sort of mixing of many, many different cultures and religions and ideas and so on. So he has been trying to use or take the spirit of Dali to bring together Buddhists throughout different parts of Asia. And when we were with him, I think 2 years ago, he talked about developing a South Asian Buddhist forum. And Mangesh and I were very excited by this idea, because this is the sort of thing that we want to see developing here. I'll just say a little bit more about him. He's been promoting the cultural side of the Belt and Road policy of the government of China. And, you know, I can't say anything about the political side, but the cultural side actually is a wonderful, there's nothing to be afraid of there. You know, bringing together nations on the basis of their common cultural links. And so we like very much his thinking on this. He's also been trying to bring to the forefront what is called Humanistic Buddhism. Now, this may come out later on in our talks this afternoon or tomorrow. There's one paper on the founder, really, of Humanistic Buddhism, Master Tai Shu, who is really the greatest reformer of Chinese Buddhism. He lived in the first half of the last century. So he promoted this idea of Buddhism for this life. Now, it's very difficult to understand that without understanding its context, but it's something that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar also spoke of. He said, I think I'm right, I prefer humanistic Buddhism to monastic Buddhism. Yeah? Very significant. So Master Chonghua has been developing these ideas, this thinking in Dali, And this has inspired Mangesh and I, and this has resulted in this conference here. So, this is a small start to something that we hope will grow and grow. Small start because although we have a beautiful campus, beautiful buildings, we still live on a survival level, and we just can't afford to bring scholars and others from different parts of the world to join us here. So everyone here has come at their own expense, and we're really very, very grateful for that. But we hope that in future this sort of this theme can develop further and further. Our three keynote speeches today, Master Chong Hua, Venerable Ratnateru, and Professor Torat, you'll hear more about them from Mangesh as he introduces them. But they're exceptional in their fields, and as well as many of the people giving papers here today. So India has a lot to learn from the spiritual riches and the spiritual traditions of China and of Sri Lanka. But it's not one way. I believe that these countries will learn an equal amount from the Ambedkarite situation here. And I'll just mention a couple of ways. First of all, there's Dr. Ambedkar's own approach to Buddhism, which was actually dismissed by and large in the Buddhist world when he converted to Buddhism in 1956 and when he produced a Buddhist Bible. Some people dismissed it as Dr. Ambedkar's Dhamma, not the Buddha's Dhamma. As I said, it ties up very much with Master Taishu's approach. It links in with the great inspirer of Buddhism in Sri Lanka in the last century, Anagarika Dhammapala. I personally, even after being here for 40 years, find more and more insights in his approach to Buddhism as I go along. So I believe that his approach to Buddhism will have an increasing impact on the Asian world. Secondly, there's his movement. And as I said, this is unique. It's a grassroots Buddhist movement. In the past, Buddhism used to spread by going to the king, to the emperor. But today it's completely different. It's relating to the needs of those who are really at the ground level of society. And that's what gives it its strength. And this too, I believe, is going to be very important for the future of Buddhism in Asia. Then lastly, there's a freshness about Buddhism here. You know, when I came to India, some of my Indian friends would say, some of our Bhikshu friends from Southeast Asia, they say, you know, you, followers of Baba said, you're second-class Buddhists. We're first-class Buddhists because we're born Buddhists. You're second-class. You're not up to us yet. So I would say, Nagarjuna, was he a born Buddhist? No, he converted to Buddhism. Ashoka, was he a born Buddhist? No, he became Buddhist. The Buddha, he wasn't a born Buddhist. So what you see in the Buddhist world, in Buddhist history, is incredible vitality, incredible freshness coming from those who take on Buddhism consciously and really change their lives as a result. So I believe that this freshness, this dynamism can impact the wider Asian world. So that's really all I have to say by way of introduction as sort of why we're having this conference. You know, there's the most central teaching of Buddhism, Pratitya Samappada. That is, I don't know in Chinese how you say it, but conditioned co-production. This is the principle of conditionality. And usually we understand this in negative terms. Yeah? This thing impacts us negatively. This thing impacts us negatively. And, you know, because of that, we do this negatively. Because of this, we do this negatively. But the Buddha taught another approach. There's a positive kind of conditionality. If we act in such a way, if we act on the basis of mindfulness, if we act on the basis of metta, loving kindness, then that sets off a positive trait. So Buddhism teaches us that we don't just have to be passive to what's happening, we can actually create our future. We can create what we're going to be tomorrow by how we are today. And this is what this conference is all about. We're trying to bring people together to see if we can't create together a movement, a positive movement in Asia, which, through Buddhism, which will lead to peace, cooperation and harmony. Sorry I've taken a long time, but welcome again to all of you. Thank you.